Hi, my name is Christi, and this podcast is my pursuit to glean practical wisdom on femininity, homemaking, finances, and relationships from the God-fearing women in my life. Hope you enjoy this journey with me as we learn to smile at the future. Now let's dive right in. Hi, everyone. It's another beautiful spring week. God is still in control of all of the details of your life, and it is that knowledge that causes us to smile at the future. Follow us on Instagram if you want to see quotes from episodes, upcoming questions that we will cover, the resources that were recommended, and in a few weeks, we will do some introductions of the ladies that make this podcast happen. You can also suggest topics and questions for future episodes through our Instagram page, or you can send us an email at smilingatthefuturepodcast@gmail.com. In today's episode, I sit down with two friends, Lara and Heather, to exchange answers on questions we might receive on singleness. It was a really fun discussion to have, and I want to offer a big thank you to those who submitted questions for us to cover in this conversation. I hope you enjoy, and now here is our discussion. Lara and Heather, thank you both for being willing to think through these questions and offer your wisdom on how to best respond in a gracious and humorous way to these. And I would love for Lara, if you could start us off by sharing a little bit about yourself to give our listeners some familiarity. And also, Heather, if you could follow.
Sure. So I'm Lara. I live in sunny Los Angeles, California, actually about 5 minutes away from Christi. I moved here 2.5 years ago. I'm originally from the Portland, Oregon area. So love anything outdoors, love hiking, love camping. Christi is recently introducing me to the world of backpacking. Love a good cup of coffee. Yeah. And I work for my dad, actually. He owns a small family business in the vacation rental industry that I get to manage for him. So that's a really sweet situation. And I was thinking it might be helpful for the context of this conversation to know I'm 35 years old, completely single, would love to be married. The Lord just hasn't allowed that yet. And in the context of my family, I'm the oldest of four sisters, 6 kids, but 4 sisters. And 2 of them are married. One is getting married in a month. And so I'm kind of the last single one. So when I'm interacting with people about singleness, that's the context of my life that they're approaching me with.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's helpful to know that background. And Heather, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Heather. I live about an hour and a half away from you gals in Bakersfield. And I went to the same church down there that you girls are attending, but have moved back to Bakersfield to be back with family. I'm one of 6 kids and the oldest of the girls. I'm not married. I'm 33 and I am dating right now. I work at a hospital. I was a teacher for 10 years, but I work in a hospital now. I also love travel and coffee, just like Lara, and I'm sure Christi as well. So yeah, thankful to be on here and talk through some of these things.
Yeah, thank you. So before we dive into the questions, I just want to give a little bit of a foundation and some context that the responses we're going to offer to the listeners are, in the context of a situation where you might not know the person too well who's asking the question, or you just don't have the time to appropriately answer the question. So that's when you might whip out one of these answers. Of course, we all need and want advice and wisdom on relationships from our godly disciplers and mentors. And so towards the end of the discussion, we're just going to talk about how to invite that discussion with the appropriate people, appropriate time. And we're going to just talk about how to handle some of these less than ideal contexts and circumstances when these questions come up. And so just as a reminder, most people are just curious about your life. They're asking these types of questions not to be hurtful or prying. It's just a big part of your life and they want to understand you better. It's a way to think of it is it's an awkward attempt to talk about an awkward subject. So It's hard. It's kind of the elephant in the room with a lot of people when they're interacting with singles. They just look at you and they're like, you, single, why? They just try to figure out how to express it, how to talk about it with you. And sometimes those attempts are less than helpful. That's kind of the background. And, just to remain gracious and believe the best of the person asking the questions. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4-8. That's not only for married and couples, we always hear that passage in weddings, but it can be applied to how we respond to someone asking these questions, not taking into account a wrong suffered, not being easily annoyed, not being arrogant or boastful in replying to the same old questions about singleness, but instead be patient and kind. And just as a good rule of thumb, honesty is always helpful, not to lie or, in your responses, but you can still incorporate honesty.
So some things that I've been thinking through that similar to what you were saying, Christi, is that the Bible says that a woman should be gracious. In Proverbs 11:16, it says a gracious woman attains honor. And I was just thinking for myself, I'm able to handle these situations in a more gracious manner when I am coming to the conversation, already thinking of the other person as more important than myself. And you get put in an awkward position sometimes without even realizing a question is coming, or you can find yourself in a spot where someone has said something that you realize once you explain to them that you're single, all of a sudden they're going to feel really awkward and embarrassed. And so you need to be in a place where you're able to help them kind of walk out of that hole in a very gracious manner, in a way that they're not embarrassed or ashamed by something that they said. So I just find, as I go about my conversations in general, if I have a heart towards the other person where I'm proactively, concerned for them, wanting to be sensitive to them, then I'm able to better interact with these questions and to do it in a way that's not just focused on myself and how awkward I feel, or, insecurities that want to come up in my heart. In the moment, I'm already thinking of them as more important than myself. And then I was also thinking, I think it's okay, like you were saying, to be honest in expressing a desire to be married. And I think sometimes we can come as singles wanting to show how content we are in being single. And that's really good, that we're content and that we want to show that. But I think it can come at a cost of people thinking that we don't want to be married. And I was just thinking, I don't know, if you desire to be married, I don't think you want to have people thinking that about you. And for a couple of different reasons. If they know you want to be married and you're not, then they get to witness you trusting the Lord and focusing on where he has you in the moment and just praising the Lord with you for the work that he's doing in your life. I was also thinking, I think it's easy for people to look at a single woman who is working and, involved in ministry, maybe traveling, doing some of the fun things that are associated with singleness, and to look at her and say, like, I don't think she wants marriage, or that people in our age group are kind of in the same spot as people in the world in general that are getting married later and later, and just easy to view us as a generation as not desiring marriage when that's not true. And so I think it's good to let it be known to people that, yeah, I do desire marriage. The Lord hasn't provided that, but that's something that I want. And then also, you never know. One of these people might know a great guy that they want to introduce you to in the long run. So there's nothing wrong. I don't think we have to be shy to let it be known that we want to be married if that's a true desire in our heart.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Lara. I also wanted to just read a quote here too, because it really hit the nail on the head. And it's by a lady named Shayna Shoot, I believe her last name is. And it's just something I came across when I was browsing this topic online. But she said, without exception, before anyone has ever asked me about my marital status, I have already posed the same questions to myself. That's why the questions hurt so much. It's like having a sore toe that someone unknowingly steps on. Therefore, you can deal with the pain of the questions about your single life by bringing them to God for healing and truth before anyone has a chance to ask them. That way, they won't hurt quite so much. If you ask yourself why you are alone, reaffirm your trust in a sovereign God who loves you. If you doubt your ability to love, believe that God is able to give us the right kind of heart needed to love others. And if you think you're somehow dysfunctional and that's why you can't have a relationship, remind the devil, who is the author of accusation, that God dearly loves you and that He has created you for a particular purpose and plan, which is unfolding day by day. So I just thought that was so helpful that you bring these fears, these questions about your singleness and why you're single to the Lord first. Rest those fears there, and then you'll find that when people ask these questions, they won't hurt as much. You'll have more confidence to respond. Heather, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah. So actually, some of the principles that I kind of came up with preliminary are very similar as both of you girls. So not surprised by that. So I would say, yeah, for sure, thinking about others instead of yourself and how you respond. And it makes me think of Ephesians 4 and the verses that talk about your speech being seasoned with salt. And I remember a biblical counselor saying one time that is not just a phrase. What that means is when you season something with salt, it makes the person thirstier for more. And so what you end up being able to share with them may be something that they want to hear more about what it is you're talking about. And so it's just an opportunity to talk about the Lord in your life and bring things back to Him. But like Lara said too, just to be careful with the way that you phrase things so that you are not hurting someone else's feelings and making them feel awkward for asking a question. Another thing that I thought of was just to be thankful always, just for all things. There's always something to be thankful for. And it's easy to look at the negative, but there's also so many blessings that the Lord has given. I think if we have an attitude of being thankful as we're talking with others, hopefully that is what rubs off and they don't walk away thinking, oh, that poor girl, just get married, my goodness. And preparing your mind ahead of time over and over again. So you kind of already touched on that. Another thing that I just thought about was God is redeeming us and redeeming the other person, and if they're a believer. And that's His job. So it's not necessarily in these questions and answers that we need to enlighten them and we need to change them. That's not our job. Our job is to tell the work of the Lord in our own hearts and let Him use that in their lives to maybe encourage them. But I know sometimes I want to respond in my head in a way that's like, you need to never ask this question again. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's bad. Two other just kind of things off the beginning here. Romans 5:8 just talks about how God has prepared works for each of us to do. And so if we are constantly analyzing or thinking of the negatives, then we're going to be missing out on the works that God has prepared for us. And He has specifically put us in the spot that we are now. So are we being obedient, faithful, and cheerful in our singleness? Or are we not? Because we're missing out on the works that He has put us in. And this is the best spot for us to be used in kingdom work, not wherever we think we are. And then the last one is emotions are going to be strong. I am a huge crier. I cry at everything, like the sunset, flowers, people, birds, everything. I cry because I haven't cried in a week, because it's just time. So some people are going to be more sensitive. Some people are just going to be more defensive. So keep it lighthearted when people are asking these questions that may be touchy. A lot of us just respond in different ways. And when we can keep it, thinking of others and keeping it lighthearted, then, that just kind of lightens the mood and helps put people at ease with a topic that does have such strong emotions attached to it.
And not everyone is going to get every one of these questions. And I certainly haven't. I've only gotten a handful. So just keep that in mind. These are not always going to come your way, but when they do, hopefully after today, you'll feel a little more prepared on how to handle them graciously. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hop into our first one. So a question that you might be asked, why aren't you married? Or also, why are you still single?
Well, one thing I had said earlier, as we were kind of prepping for this, one time I told someone it's because Prince Charming rides a turtle, not a horse. And that just kind of lightened the mood in the moment. And you have to be careful, who you're sharing with. But in all honesty, I think this question, Christi, it implies something's wrong with you. Like, why aren't you married? Why are you still single? I think the question itself just shows your theology. And it can show on one hand that that the person asking the question believes that marriage is a good thing, which is right. But it also can imply that something's wrong with you or wrong with your story that God's made for you, that God's made a mistake or that he's forgotten about you. And so I think you do have to be, gracious in your answer. I mean, one thing that I've said to people with that, I've gotten that a lot, God hasn't made that clear yet. I'd love to be married. I'd love to start a family, but the Lord hasn't made that clear yet. Also, just considering it's not yet in God's plan. And some people will respond and say, oh, it's not the right time yet. Well, what if it's never time? What if the Lord doesn't have that in your future? Like you can't wait and wait and wait and think that he's going to answer in the way that you want. So I think you have to take it back to, it's not quite the Lord's plan, but like Lara said earlier too, that's a desire of mine.
Yeah, I've actually never gotten this question, believe it or not. So I was trying to think through. A lighthearted response would be similar to Heather's, just saying, well, I think my future husband is praying that I don't marry someone else. So, and again, a lot of times you don't, like, depending on your mood in the moment, who you're speaking to, you don't have to give a serious answer. So sometimes that will just be enough and the conversation can continue on. But if you do feel like it is someone that you want to share with, again, you can just say, I would love to be married, but the Lord hasn't given me the opportunity to yet. That's a gift that he hasn't provided in my life. And that just shows, I do desire it. I acknowledge why you're asking this question, that you would assume that I would be married. And maybe that is a compliment to me that you would assume that by now I would be married. But then again, points to, I'm trusting the Lord, like he is sovereign. He's the one that decides when he gives marriage or who he gives it to. And so he hasn't given that to me yet. And that's where I'm at. So it can just be simple, but kind of pack a lot within a simple answer.
And this is one of those where you can graciously pivot the conversation to talk about what you are using your time with, travel, missions, whatever you're doing in the church. And I think this question is also one that's more likely to be directed at men, quite honestly, because I think men are, since they're the pursuers, people are going to ask them a little more pointedly, like, you can change this. Why haven't you? Kind of a thing. Whereas with women, they might be a little more gracious. So that maybe women have gotten that. I don't think I've gotten that question stated quite that way.
I definitely have.
Oh, you have?
And I think maybe too, it just depends on the circles you're in. The church that I'm at, there are very few, if any, single men. I know that there's one because I'm dating him, but there's not been a big population of single guys. And so the girls really do get that question often, which is hard. Like you said, that, the men should be pursuing. So it really puts the girls, puts women in an awkward position because they don't have that control, I guess you could say. There's things that you could do that I'm sure we'll talk about here that you can do that will help the situation. It's a good question to think through because I think it is one of the more common ones. So that's definitely one that you want to be thinking through. How would you answer that?
And with any of these questions, if you can quickly get the other person to talk about themselves, people love talking about themselves. So you could be like, oh, I would love to be married, but how did you meet your husband? And what were you looking for? And, just, turn it around that you want to learn from them. And typically that diffuses the situation and people are happy to prattle on about their life history and their love story. And it's always fun to listen to that, hear how another couple met, because every story is so unique and neat to see how God orchestrates people's love life.
Yeah. And you might garner some wisdom even just from those casual conversations. So that's valuable to do.
So this is similar to question number 1. Do you want to get married?
So I think Lara kind of touched on this at the beginning. Be honest, say yes if you do, because sometimes, we do end up trying to look more godly by having this, skirting around the question. And people honestly won't know, well, I'm not really sure, if she really wants to get married. But I think you do have to just be careful in how much you do share, depending on who it is. So I had this woman who came up to me one time, and I was the teacher for her child in 4th grade. And she said, you want to get married, don't you? And I was like, yes. And she goes, oh, well, I have a brother and he's pretty tall. So I think you could wear your heels with him. And I was like, that's not exactly the first thing that I'm thinking about, but it's just going back to that honesty of, yeah, absolutely. I've had this desire ever since I can remember. And, my parents modeled a godly marriage, growing up. Being single is not the way that God designed things, but until he makes that clear in my life, then I'm going to live the best where I can right now.
Heather, maybe you brought up a helpful point that we can think through how we want to answer these things. So the answer to, do you want to get married? You said yes, but then you could never come up with, well, the next thing that come out of her mouth is that she wants to set me up with her cousin because he's tall and I can wear my high heels, and so we can't come in saying or thinking I'm going to say this and this and this when someone asks me this question and feel like, okay, I'm going to have this situation under control. Even then, you have no clue what direction that conversation is going to take. So still have to just be trusting the Lord in the moment, still, sensitive to that person, and even just open to the awkwardness, and not letting that ruffle your feathers, and, just don't take it too seriously.
And this question, it could be a good one to bring out God's sovereignty again, that yes, I would love to get married, but as Lara, you said earlier, it's not what God has for me at this moment. God's sovereignty is something that you don't necessarily see when you look into the future, but you can observe by looking in your past, is how I understand it. And how, I have even, just as a very personal example, I've been able to share with so many people that God knew I needed to be single right now because my dad passed away unexpectedly. And I've been able to be with my mom and to support her and, just being at the home with her and helping her around the house. And that would have been more difficult if I had my own children and husband to take care of. And so I didn't know this was coming down the line. God knew. And I firmly believe that's one of the reasons why he kept me single at this point in my life. And I'm sure he could have provided for my mom's needs through somebody else, but he chose to use me at this season of life. And so it's been neat to be able to kind of point to that one example. Okay, so another question that you might get is someone asking you, are you picky? So whoever wants to tackle that one.
I've actually never gotten this question, so this was a harder one to work through. I think you could make a joke and then you don't have to actually answer that and get into it. I was just thinking I would probably answer only when it comes to my coffee, and just kidding, but just say something like I have standards, but they're nothing unattainable. I'm not picky per se in that I have a ton of boxes that a guy, has to check off for me to want to date him or to marry him. I do have some things I'm looking for, but it's not something that only one person, in my lifetime is ever gonna meet. Yeah, I think you could also just say, I don't think so. I'm just waiting for the right fit. And so far that hasn't happened yet, and just keep it at that. You don't have to get into the nitty gritty of, what you're thinking through and what you want for a guy, and, kind of inviting someone else to decide for themselves if you're picky or not, unless it's someone whose input you do want. And if it's a good friend and they're asking that, then you definitely need to have the conversation of, do you think I'm picky? Help me work through this. Help me, talk through and think through from a wise and godly standpoint. This is what I'm desiring. It's what I'm looking for. It's what I'm holding out for. Do I have this right? And please call me out if I'm not thinking correctly about something. And those are really valuable, conversations that we need to have, and have people pouring into our thought process. So
yeah, and they might not offer that feedback unless it's solicited. And so opening up with a question and inviting them to speak into your life in that specific way, because we don't want to have unrealistic expectations, and we shouldn't be expecting the maturity of a man who's been married 20 years in a single guy. So I think there's certain things that, that we need to have a more realistic expectation for. But I think more often than not, those are around physical characteristics or things that are preferences, but not character issues.
And all of these kinds of questions, the older that you get, the more you realize just what the question is actually asking and what it's implying. And so I think it helps. One of the blessings of being single as a little bit older in life is that you realize the questions that you should not be asking other people. To me, this question is so inappropriate. It's just not a helpful question. I don't think Christians should be characterized as being picky people. We shouldn't be picky about other people for sure. And so I think that, even as you're answering these questions and thinking through them, of trying to understand and try to help, like we said earlier, trying to help someone understand where you're at, but letting the Lord do the work in their hearts, but also being honest and being enough to where you can help them to not embarrass themselves by asking embarrassing questions, if that makes sense. I mean, my snarky response would be, are you picky about your husband? Or did you just lower your standards and just marry the first guy off the block? No, of course not. But I would say for this kind of a question, I'd probably answer it something like, well, it depends on what you mean by picky. There's a lot of godly characteristics that I pray for. And I don't think that is something to be picky over. I'm praying for a man who loves Christ and loves the church. And there's other things that matter, and then move on the question. But yeah, I've told Lara before, I don't want to marry a ding dong. I mean, there's some strange people in the world and they will not fit together with other people.
You don't idolize the concept of marriage. You're marrying a person. And so you have to be pretty sure that you're ready to make that commitment to that person. It's a huge life-altering decision. So if anything, people should be encouraging you to be cautious in the right ways, before stepping into that commitment.
One other thought on this is that we don't want to be picky, but I think it is wise to be discerning. As you get older too, you just see so many things that did not matter to you as a younger single person that do matter to you as an older single person, and things that don't matter as much when you get older. And just on a personal note, like me dating an older man and me being a little bit older, there are things that the Lord has so kindly brought together that it's good to be discerning. I mean, you could use the word picky, I guess, but it's neat to see how the Lord does, and looking at the marriages in our lives too, that we all can see and observe. And you see how the Lord brings people together that in ways that you just never have realized. And so he's very creative in that. And so if you come across as picky to others, you can't change somebody else's perspective, but you can help them understand there's wisdom in being discerning and in knowing what it is you're looking for that may change over time. And so in some sense, yeah, maybe you're getting pickier, but I wouldn't think of it in that way. I would just think of it a little bit different perspective.
That's really helpful that you stated it that way. Discernment is so important in this area of our lives. So another way of somebody asking you if you are married, they might rephrase it and say, do you have kids? So how would you respond to that question?
I personally love this question because usually it comes from non-believers instead of believers. Usually by the time you would get to a point in a conversation with a believer that they're asking if you have kids, they would have already asked if you're married. And so I find myself fielding this question when I'm hanging out, usually with another lady that has kids, usually in a salon getting my hair done or something like that. And it's just casual conversation. But I love answering it because I just say, no, I don't. I'm actually still waiting for God to bring the right man along for me to get married. And then I would love to have kids.
Yeah, that shows your value system, that marriage comes first.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That I have a godly perspective on relationships, that marriage is going to come first and then children. And I would love to have both someday. And then I just try to follow that up by asking questions about their kids. Usually they want to talk about theirs, so they're asking about yours. And so just showing, care for their family, and that I'm still showing value for family by asking them to share about theirs. So I really appreciate it when I get this question and have that opportunity to share.
I answered this question one time for someone a few years ago. And I said, yeah, I do. I have 26. And he just looked at me like, what? And I said, well, I'm a teacher. And so I have 26 students that I get to choose to love as best as I can while I don't have biological kids. But I love on them and I care about them and I pray for them. And another way I answer it sometimes is no, but I have nieces and nephews and I talk about them and what they're doing. Or I'll say something like, well, actually, I have, there's these 2 girls in high school at my church that I'm mentoring, and it's a blessing to be able to speak truth to them when they have a harder time hearing something from their own mom. And so that even can help somebody understand, you know what, singles have an important role in the church. And there have been times when I was a teacher and the parents would come to me and say, can you tell my kid this? Because they don't listen to me, but they listen to you. And so what a blessing to be able to speak truth into the lives of the next generation. I think of Nancy Lee DeMoss and how many women she's impacted over the years of her single life and things that she was able to impart wisdom to, where she has so many children that are not her own, but that have learned and gleaned wisdom from her life. So that's just a huge encouragement to me as well, that God's still working through me in the lives of other people, even if I don't have biological children right now.
So helpful. Great way to answer that. You can have spiritual children as well. Like you said, people you're mentoring or sharing the gospel with. So another question, probably along a similar vein of are you picky, is what are you looking for? Maybe someone is wanting to help you in this area. Maybe they have someone they want to set you up with, but they're not sure what your standard is. And so they want to better understand you.
I was thinking if it's someone that you maybe don't want their help in this area for some reason and just want it to be a lighthearted, I was thinking, well, someone like Mr. Darcy and not someone like Mr. Collins. And then, yeah, I think it depends on the level of friendship that you have with the person and how much you want to welcome their help. I think people that ask this are wanting to help and considering, as you're going to be answering, they're going to be thinking about the guys that they know and should they mention someone. So it's probably good to have a way to articulate just a broad picture of what you're looking for. It doesn't have to be detailed. For me, it'd be, I'm looking for someone who loves the Lord, who serves the church, someone who's teachable and gracious, who's ready for marriage and family, and that's not very in depth. That's just very simple. And then as the conversation moves on, you can decide, do you want to keep, pursuing if they're wanting to help you in that way, or if they're bringing someone to mind. You can consider that. I think you don't necessarily have to get into kind of the deeper things that you would look for, or more detailed things. Like you don't have to flesh out what does serving the church look like in your mind, or what does someone who is teachable and gracious, what does that look like? Or someone who's ready for marriage and family, like what do you think of when you think of that? But yeah, that can open the door to someone helping you, but in a very gentle manner, that you're not committed to all of a sudden, like if they oh, I know so-and-so and he matches this perfectly. Now, like you're kind of committed to, okay, I need to go on a date with this guy, so, but then also be ready. Like if there is someone who you trust to consider what you're looking for and who knows godly men, who is wise and how they'll kind of set you up with a guy, like, yeah, feel free to go ahead and just share things that you want, that you see as marks of maturity and that you would be looking for in a guy, and see if they would be willing to help you in some way. So I think it just depends on, how open you are to that person and their input in your life.
My answer would just be pretty short and simple. Once again, if it's not somebody that I want to overshare this part of my life with, I would just say, I'm looking for someone who loves God and loves people. And it's just short and sweet. And of course, many more details are part of that picture, but that's just one way to shut the discussion down. I don't know. Heather, did you have any thoughts?
It's just similar to what you girls have already said. You could turn that question around and just say, what did you look for, or what do you love about your husband? And in an honest way, to both turn the conversation, but also just to learn and to glean wisdom from someone else. I think, it's not bad to say, well, that's a big question. That's something that I want someone who models the characteristics of godly men in the Bible and the godly men that I see in my life. I have lots of great examples, and it doesn't hurt to throw in a couple character qualities that mean a lot to you. Like Lara, you mentioned, and yet I think a lot of people can get caught up on what's your type or what's your list. And it's not wrong to have a list. I have a list of characteristics and things that I pray for, things that I have prayed for many, many years, but it's been refined over the years and the preference issues have dropped off. And God knows if we do have preferences. He knows if there's something on our heart that we just think would be so beneficial for our lives. But again, that's not, a make or break issue. And if he decides, no, you need to trust me in that area and I'll handle it, then that's all good and well as well. But yeah, I think this is probably one that, especially with the podcast today, just kind of being geared towards people who maybe don't know you super deeply. I think this is one that you just kind of want to answer and keep going and not spend too much time. And again, to be thankful and gracious to people when they say, oh, I've got a brother's, cousin's, aunt's, cat's brother, like whatever. I'm okay,
But Heather, I love your idea of asking them what they looked for in their husband. And maybe that would even allow them to share, like, this is what I looked for, but even now, like, this is what I appreciate in my husband that maybe I wasn't looking for. And that could even help you kind of hone in on, oh, what should my kind of make or breaks be as I'm listening to other women share what has impacted their marriage based on, who they chose to be their husband.
Yeah. And you could even say like, wow, those qualities are rare these days, or just make some comment that they understand that it's hard and rare to find a man that is God fearing and loves the Lord. So they're not a dime a dozen. So saying something to that effect, that they realize this is not just prolific. This is hard to find, but God knows where they are.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, that there are men like that. And so, it is encouraging to know God hasn't forgotten about the single women in the world, and he hasn't forgotten the single men in the world. And, he is working out his plans. But we can become like Elijah and think, I'm the only prophet left. There's no options. And then God's like, no, I got 7,000 more in the caves. Like, you just don't know about it.
So another question that you might get from people is, have you tried online?
So I would say just give a simple yes or no answer if it's not someone that you know well, and you don't need to necessarily go into why yes or no. I would think if it's a good friend asking, go ahead and have the conversation and get their input. And a lot of times they're going to be asking that because they know that you likely haven't. So they're asking, have you thought about it? And that's something that I think a lot of singles kind of have to wrestle through before actually making the plunge. And wisdom is found in many counselors. And so if you have someone that you trust, like, have that conversation. Do you think I should be considering this for my life? Do you think that would be a good thing with what you know about me and my current situation? So
Heather, did you have any thoughts?
Not really on this one. I have not tried online. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that though.
Okay. Yes, I have tried different online dating sites and apps over the years. So I would just say, yes, I have actually, but I have found that I prefer the safeguard of having mutual friends that can vouch for the person's character. So, do you know anyone? No, I just leave it at that. But I have gotten ladies who listen to this podcast send me emails asking if I recommend online dating. So I'm just going to share a little bit on my thoughts. Take it or leave it, and know this is coming just from my own personal experience with online dating. So I think it's a tool, and I think we all know wonderful, godly couples who have met through online dating. I think some women might feel that it's taking matters into their own hands and somehow circumventing God's sovereignty. So I would caution, if you have that conviction, I would just remind you that it's amoral. It's a tool. It's not. God knew that you would be at this point in history with this technology, and he can use it, and he has used it to bring couples together. And you can also just be wise in how you use online dating. I take a very backseat approach whenever I've created a profile. I always put in the profile that I have old-fashioned values and standards, and I prefer if the man makes the first move. So I don't go on and message all the guys on the site. I just leave my profile there. People are welcome to contact me And that's not everyone's approach. So whatever you have a conviction on in that matter, I guess I just handle it how I would any real life situation. I normally am not very aggressive in my interactions and communication with men. And so I just behave that same way through my online presence. Another thing I would say is that at any time in history, this might be the best year to be trying online dating. I think there are probably quite a few new normal people.
The pool is big.
Yeah, it's a lot of people because of COVID are on these sites. And I think we've all seen the news stories that talk about how business is booming on dating sites. And I also would recommend online dating if you are someone who maybe you don't even know anybody, any godly men, or you're in a rural area or you just don't have the opportunity to meet guys. I think this might be a little more ideal for you. Not saying that God can't bring someone into your context, but yeah, I mean, I think this is one way that God could do that. I do have cautions with online dating. I would say make sure you have godly men in your life that can thoroughly vet any guy you're getting to know. I have 5 very masculine brothers who will step up to the plate and do that for me. So I'm well protected. So I've felt a little more at ease, I guess, going on online dating. I would also say that it's probably wise to have another person reading some of your communication. I would send some of my messages to my parents or somebody else I trusted because they could usually pick out any red flags in the person I was corresponding with if I wasn't able to identify those. So I just appreciated having that accountability since I didn't know anything about this guy other than what he presented on his profile. So I think it's good to have that level of accountability and just try to meet in person or have a phone call as soon as possible. I think in person interaction is going to be key in knowing if you're a good fit with this person. And I went to France for an extended trip some years ago, and I was corresponding with a man while I was there from eHarmony. We corresponded for, I think, 6 weeks. And then when I came back from my trip, we met in person, and it was very clear from that first interaction that we were not a good fit. But his written communication was excellent. You know, we corresponded well, but it was interesting to see how that in-person dynamic was just not there. I think it can also online dating can convince you that the right and perfect guy is just around the corner, and it can also kind of turn dating into more of a consumer type mentality for you. So I would just guard yourself from that, thinking that way. It is a big investment in time. So just be aware of that. You will deal with ghosting, drop off communication, things of that nature. Just be aware that's pretty normal in online dating where you'll be writing somebody and then all of a sudden you won't hear from them. And that happened to me a few times. And I remember the first time it happened, I pretty much felt like my heart broke because I had really built this person up in my mind to be the perfect person. And it turns out he had been communicating with somebody else and so he just decided to go with her. And so it was hard to deal with that. So if you're somebody who has a really sensitive heart and maybe more emotional, just be aware that that's something you might deal with. And lastly, I think with online dating, the thing that I didn't appreciate is that it sometimes feels like you skip the friendship phase of a relationship, which is for women especially difficult because we're so relational and we depend on getting to know that person, getting to know their personality and who they are. And it almost feels like you go from 0 to 60 with a lot of expectation hinging on your communication that this is going in a romantic direction. So you might just want to state up front, you know what, I'm really interested in building a friendship first. Just let the guy know you're not there to go, start dating right away, maybe, but you want to build that foundation, that friendship before it takes on a more serious note. And then I do have one last thought. Be gracious. Many men are not good at formulating their thoughts or expressing themselves. in a written format. So just be careful on who you write off. If someone has a really short bio or something of that nature, just know that that's common for guys. And a lot of them are doing this on their own. They're not getting a lot of help from anyone else. It's new territory for them. So just be gracious and be aware of that how they express themselves in a written format is probably different than if they were in person.
Christi, do you mind if I circle back to one thing that you shared?
Sure.
So circle back, I had some thoughts on your comments on the Lord's sovereignty and people maybe thinking that going online, doing online dating is taking the reins in their own hands a little bit. And I was thinking recently, the Lord's sovereignty has allowed me to do things that maybe aren't as comfortable for me, and to do things to get to know guys in ways that aren't my ideal way of meeting a man. But realizing like I can have a perfect view of how this relationship should work, of how I should meet a man, whether it's I only want to meet a man who's in my church, or only meet a man that all of my siblings know, or those types of things that have wisdom in them. But also I can find myself putting myself in a box. And I think recognizing the Lord's sovereignty in my life has allowed me, if he gives me an opportunity to meet someone, if I'm set up with someone, if I'm, I've been recently set up long distance, and that's not necessarily something that I pursue, but if the Lord allows that opportunity, just realizing he's sovereign and he could work in these situations to bring about marriage and to teach me to trust him even more in new ways along the way. And so I think knowing that the Lord is sovereign over our lives can allow us to not take the reins, if that's what you feel that would be doing in your own heart. Like Christi said, you can't push yourself against your conscience in that way, or against, what your own heart attitude would be, but also to allow yourself to put yourself in situations that you wouldn't maybe naturally be choosing. Not saying that you're, discarding wisdom, not saying that you're doing things that aren't safe. But I think even as women, we have to be careful not just to have a parameter around the type of guy that we want to marry, but how the Lord's going to work to bring him about. And we need to be putting ourselves in a position that he's able to work his will out if that's what he desires in this moment. And you don't know that until you're willing to try something. So yeah, I think that would be something that I've had to learn and even force myself into positions of just, I need to trust the Lord and I need to be willing to give this a shot, because I don't know, the Lord could use this, even if it's not completely in my comfort zone. Like I need to be willing just to trust him and see what he's going to do, and be fine with that, and be fine with him working differently than how I would prefer for him to work. So that's something I've had to learn, and would love to encourage other ladies to being open to doing too.
And Lara, I think that's just the heart behind all of that is so good for the rest of your life. Like there's going to be constant decisions that we have to make where we have to be brave. We have to step out of our comfort zone, and not just in the dating world or the, romantic relationships, but just in life. There's things that the Lord will call us to do that we do not think we have the strength to do, or we don't have, maybe even it is something that pricks at our conscience at the beginning. But I know for me, there's been times, and I have a gal at church who we just have a great relationship, and she's kind of like an older sister to me. And she has challenged me at times to do things, or to go back to someone and follow back up with a conversation and say something that is so difficult. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. That's too hard. And she's like, no, this is the right thing. Right now you need to serve, or right now you need to, whatever it is. But that has been so good for me, and my heart's pounding, and I have to, do something that's difficult, and it takes a lot of courage, but it is so good. And I trust her because she has the wisdom of someone who's been married. She has children. She's been further down in life than I have. And so that is why I sometimes can take that final step out of my comfort zone, is because I know that this godly woman who does know me well is encouraging something. But going back to what you said, Lara, there's lots of different situations to practice that in. And, if this is what the Lord's using to challenge you and to grow you and to sanctify you, and it's uncomfortable, then, well, that just might be the price for it. But the Lord can do amazing things on the other side of it.
And he's not just working to bring you a husband, he's working to cause you to trust him more and more in all these situations, and to give up your own desires, your own will, and to just want his will for your life. So he can use these things in that growth process.
And it trains you to be braver the next time to do something in his will. The more that you practice and stretch those muscles, the stronger you're going to be in, all right, Lord wants me to do this. All right, I'm going to do it, even though I don't know how it's going to work out. I mean, you think of Abraham and Daniel and all these people in the Bible who did so many things out of their comfort zone. And so taking those kinds of principles and applying them in this situation is great. I don't know if practice is the right word because this is real life, but it's good strengthening for where we're at.
Very helpful, ladies. Thank you. So next question, and this is a little more common. Have you thought about so-and-so? That question comes along, they throw someone else, there's someone else's name in there that. How do you respond to that?
This one can be a little bit tricky because now you're now involved in the conversation is another real person on the other end. It's like they're honestly bringing a man to you and asking your opinion on him if you know him. And so I think you have to be really careful. Don't try to say anything funny unless it's something that's not going to be hurtful or downplaying him in any way. So I think if it's just an acquaintance that you don't really want to talk to them about this, just say, something like, oh, he seems like a nice guy, and try to keep moving on, just something non-committal, where they understand that you're not necessarily wanting to get in the conversation, but again, in a gracious way. And then depending just on the level of your friendship, like if someone's a friend, maybe they're not necessarily saying like, I'm going to set you up or anything, but they're just curious or like in their mind thinking, yeah, you guys would be a really good fit. Like, I think you can feel free to say something like, I think he's a great guy, but he hasn't asked me out yet, and just kind of leave it at there. Like, yeah, if you asked me out, I'd be totally in, but that's just where things stand. So, or on the flip side, I think he's a great guy, but honestly, like, I don't think he and I would be a good fit. And just try to, not to be proactive in building up the men around you and how you're talking to other people about them. Don't use that as a time to, bring out why you wouldn't be interested in getting to know him better, or just be really careful with that careful in your speech in that way. And then, if it's someone that you know well, that you trust, again, like here's an opportunity for you potentially to ask them if you don't know the guy, like, oh, I've never met him, but, tell me about him. Love to hear about him. Or if you do know him, like, why do you think him? Why do you think we'd be a great fit? And give them time to explain what they're thinking, and then don't be afraid to ask for help in getting to know him. Like, hey, like, if you think of it, like, I'd love to have you introduce us, or, just I'm totally open to that. And I think people can be shy to put it on you that, hey, can I introduce you? Can I do the setting up? And, that can be a pressureful situation. So people can be shy to just offer that. But if you make it clear, like, yeah, I'd be totally in. I think people, you'll find in general, are willing to help you out that way.
Yeah. No, good that you brought out, Lara, that this can be an opportunity to gossip and overshare. And I've caught myself doing this before when even just peers, other girls have asked me, what about this guy? And I'd be like, oh, well, let me tell you, like, he dated this friend and this is how he behaved. And like, there's a lot of water under that bridge. It's just not helpful to overshare that type of information. You don't want to hurt their chances. And more than likely, they're not unmarriable or, they're still marriage material, but they weren't a good fit for your friend or you. And so by oversharing, you might even be hurting their chances with other women that's going to stick in their mind, and they're going to treat that man like a pariah. So be brief, be honest, gracious, but don't overshare or lead into gossip.
I think some people, like Lara, you were saying, some people are kind of shy to set you up. And then you have the other people who are bold as a lion, and you're like, whoa, calm down here. I know for me, just being at a smaller church right now and showing up to church one day, coming to the church that I was at and being a single girl, I came, and the man that I'm dating, Darren, is one of the single men there. And so immediately a lot of people just started pairing us up and, what about him? What about him? And ask him the same thing. And some people are more on the bold side of things. And so I do think you have to be gracious and kind in the way that you respond. I mean, like all of these questions, but the question behind it is well-meaning for 95% of the people. They want to see you happy. And so when you do just put down their suggestion, it can reflect poorly on the man, but it can also reflect poorly on the person who's asking and who's suggesting. And so, if you're super offended or have an immediate opinion that's more on the negative or on the I'm not interested side, that could make the person asking the question feel really bad for bringing it up. So that's just one thing to consider. But yeah, I totally agree with all of Lara's answers. You could go with, hey, he's a great man. I'd love the opportunity to get to know him better. Or, I don't know him well, but I wouldn't mind meeting him. And, if you want to plan a game night with a bunch of people, like, hey, that'd be great. Let's do that. Or he's a great guy. He's got some good qualities. I don't think he's the right fit for me, but, thanks for thinking of me, kind of a thing.
So we're going to next go into some statements that people will say. So they don't always warrant a response from you, but sometimes you do want to say something. So one statement, and I've gotten this a couple times, is someone will say something to the effect of, well, don't worry, you've got time. I knew someone who got married at 70. And they'll say that in hopes that it'll just boost your spirit and you'll be so encouraged by that. If anything, it does have the opposite effect. It can be a little deflating. So if you ladies have any clever or gracious responses to that one.
Could be like, well, I know somebody who got pregnant at 90, like Sarah in the Bible. So there's that. That's one question that no matter how many times I would prepare for ahead of time, the don't worry, just keep waiting. Or, I know people have gotten married later in life. I think it's just, that one's hard for me to answer. And so I end up just kind of saying, oh, and kind of leaving it at that, and then kind of moving on to something else, just because it's not encouraging. And that is one that definitely stings, but it's still something that I'm responsible to respond graciously to. And so the only gracious thing I can think sometimes is just, oh, and then that's it.
Yeah, just think once again what we talked about at the beginning is it's still the person asking or saying that is well-meaning. More than likely, they're not realizing that it's not helpful. So just saying something to the effect of, well, isn't it neat to see how everyone's love story is unique and so different? And, just something to that effect that, wow, God has a unique way of bringing people together and his timing isn't always our timing, but that's neat to see his faithfulness in that couple's life or something similar.
And Christi, this might be a good time even just to bring up the point, like we all say dumb stuff that later we think about and regret saying. All of us have been in that spot where you look back on a conversation and you're like, wow, like I literally was not thinking about what I said in that moment, and not, you're not purposely being offensive. You're just maybe trying to think of something to say in the moment, and you feel awkward yourself, and then the wrong thing comes out. And so just being gracious with people that maybe they're not even considering what they're saying as it's coming out of their mouth. And we've all done that and potentially hurt other people in our life. And so we need to extend the same grace to others that we want to have extended to us in those really stupid moments. So.
Yes. Thank you, Lara. Okay. So the next statement or sentiment, it might be expressed in different ways, but it's the idea that once you fully trust the Lord and let go of this desire of marriage, then God will make it happen and bring a man into your life. Can you, either of you, speak to that?
I think this one's a hard one because the person's putting a presupposition that you will be able to fully trust the Lord. And I've learned, and I think this would be part of my answer, is that, well, I was going to give my answer. I would just say something that in singleness, I've learned that trusting the Lord is a daily thing and is something that I'm never going to do perfectly, but he's absolutely using my singleness to continue to grow my trust in him. And he's maturing me in that way. And I trust that in the right time, he's going to bring the right guy into my life. And I think in that conversation, like, be careful not to have it in your mind all of a sudden that there is an expectation for you to be perfect in some way before the Lord is going to allow something into your life. And trust in singleness can be, a day-to-day battle, even sometimes a minute-to-minute battle where you're battling discontentment, battling insecurities, and wanting to fully place your trust in the Lord. And he's using that to grow you in that way. So I think it would be good if you can figure out how to graciously turn it around and show, like, kind of what you're bringing to the table here isn't true. Like, the Lord doesn't promise a blessing once I'm perfect in one area of my life, and to show them, like, I am trusting, I am learning, I'm growing. The Lord is using this. I understand what you're saying, that I need to be trusting him. But if you can somehow, again, graciously help them to see kind of what they put on you, and change their thinking in that way, I think that would be really good.
I think it's helpful to take it back to scripture and to look at just even the examples that we find of people who trusted God and did not have prayers answered. I think of a Hebrews 11 in the verse that says, all of these, having seen the promises from a distance, they welcomed them, but they did not receive them. And I think that's an encouragement. It can be a discouragement, but it can also be an encouragement if you look at it in that perspective, because their hope was in something further than this life. And they struggled and strived and flopped and floundered through this world and did not realize that their stories would be written for thousands of years of believers to look back and see all of their failings, and yet their trust in the Lord. That has been such an encouragement to believers throughout the centuries. So I think that that's helpful to, maybe in your answer to someone, to kind of take it just a different route instead of answering the question, or I know it's more of a statement, but kind of redirecting the conversation to, you're right. It is difficult to trust the Lord in this, but I know that this life is not perfect, and none of us are going to be totally ready before the Lord in different areas. And once we are, then some other area is going to pop up that we're going to have to, that game whack-a-mole where you're constantly bopping things on the head. Something else is going to pop up, and then you're going to struggle with this again. And I think this is probably one that I actually would probably answer more on a serious note, or respond in a serious manner, just to bring it back to, the Lord's kindness and his sovereignty is really, we talked about sovereignty earlier, but his sovereignty is his knowledge, his wisdom of how to work that knowledge, plus the power to do it, plus his love in a loving way. And so when you can even just start talking about who the Lord is, once you fully trust the Lord, it'll happen. Take off the part of their statement of the it'll happen, and just focus on how you are trusting the Lord, what it looks to trust the Lord, and just kind of reroute the conversation to put it back on him and to give him glory in how he is working in your lives. And I don't think it's wrong to even say, it's been a blessing to see how the Lord has brought me so far already. And the things that I'm so thankful. I tell people all the time, I'm so thankful you didn't know me 10 years ago, because you would probably not have been my friend. And you see God's growth over the years.
That's all really good points. And I think too, even from our own perspective, our own fears of inadequacy, or, the feeling of, will I ever be fully ready for married life? The Lord works with earthen vessels and people that are flawed, and will never be fully there and ready for each season of life. But the Lord grows us in those seasons. So don't lose heart and think that you have to arrive at some standard before the Lord will bless you with a man. A lot of times he'll bring a man into your life to grow you and sanctify you more and purify those motives, but not before.
And you'll have to trust the Lord in new ways within marriage, and the cycle continues of him using those things to draw us to him in new ways.
I think on a practical note, if that person is sharing their response or their statements that that does sting and that does hurt, be careful with your own heart. Don't open up more to a person who may unintentionally keep opening up that wound. That might not be the best person for you to be mentored by, because if that is their view, then it might be hard to trust some of the other things and the other advice that they're giving you. So, again, that statement normally comes from people who don't know you super well, but just be willing to not even to not share too much.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so the last statement here that we're going to address is the statement that you're just too intimidating to the guys in your life, or kind of a similar statement, none of the guys I know are good enough for you. So, how would you respond to either of those?
Just say, I know, I'm awesome.
Yeah. None of the guys measure up. I know.
Actually, don't say that.
Or just, yep, I'm pretty scary.
I think that's putting you as the standard, and they have to measure up to your standard, when it should not necessarily be flip-flopped and you measuring up to their standard. The standard is Christ. And, they mean that as a compliment, but, there's a level where you could say, hey, can you help me understand what you mean? Do you see areas in me that you think need to change? And then be humble and willing to hear them if that's the question and that's the direction you want to take with that person. But, you on the other hand, you could say there's some great godly men out there. And, I've had friends getting married, and there's still men out there. There's still godly guys that the Lord is not growing up, but the raising, in this generation. The Lord can do what he can do. And honestly, I have a lot to grow in. And if you don't see that right now, then, well, it'll probably come out later if I'm married.
I think sometimes people will use the you're just too intimidating. Maybe you're just too intimidating because they can't think of another reason of why you wouldn't be married. And so I would just say, like, yep, I'm pretty scary. Like, I'm not going to take you too seriously, or this statement too seriously. And, you and I both know, like, I'm not intimidating. I'm not literally scaring guys away, but sometimes they'll just try to, like, I can't think of why you're not married. So I'm trying to think of some reason, to assure you that there's nothing wrong with you that I can see, that I believe that you would be someone, worth marrying, being a wife to a man. And so, yeah, just often to not take that statement too seriously. And then, yeah, with the none of the guys I know are good enough for you, that's a really hard one, especially if you can think of men that you'd like to be asked out by. And so, yeah, I think just be careful not to let your mind or heart go too far in thinking about some of these things that people say. Or maybe it's true. Maybe you're in a smaller context where there aren't many guys, and maybe the ones that are, in your life and the life of this person that you're talking to, maybe they're not as spiritually mature as you in some ways. And that's just reality. And they're sharing, like, I want to help. I want to, I'm thinking of this for you, but I just can't think of anything right now. And again, yeah, being careful that doesn't become a focus on what the men in your life are not, if that's a situation that you find yourself in, but keep trusting the Lord in that. I think with the intimidating question, like, if someone that you know well says that multiple times, it's up to you, but it could be a conversation to have. It could be helpful. Like, you keep saying this, like, is there something that you see that you think that I should just be aware about of people's perception about me? And you have to be ready to receive that input and to handle that in a mature way, especially if it's them sharing something good about your life, where they think, like, maybe, because of this, that might be intimidating to the guys. And if you can take that knowledge and in some way help it in your interaction with people, to cause you to be more sensitive, to cause you to be more outgoing if you need to cause you to show humility within the area that they're sharing, could be intimidating. If you feel like that's something, a conversation that would be helpful to have, and for you to understand, like, maybe there is something behind what they're sharing, that might be a conversation worth considering having. But yeah, consider it carefully, because it will bring up conversation that you'll have to navigate carefully.
Most of this discussion, we've been talking about how to redirect questions or answer them in short, concise, honest ways. But now, with the right mentors and disciplers in your life, you can invite them to discuss this in your life. How do you do that? How do you invite discussion on relationships? I just have a couple of thoughts. I would ask somebody, is there anything that you would recommend that I change in my approach to dating and relationships, or do I have misplaced expectations? Married couples will know what things that singles put a high level of importance on, but are really not that important the other side of marriage. So they might be able to identify that in your life, things that you're overemphasizing. So that's good to get clarity on that. And then also just asking them, what men in our circles do you see as mature and husband material? And am I passing somebody up that I shouldn't be? So those are just two ways that I would invite discussion on relationships from somebody that I trust and want their advice on.
One thing I was thinking is these conversations will happen with people that you trust and that are already involved in your life. And so for me, the conversations around singleness usually center on something that I'm actually interacting with in my own life. And so having a transparency with people of sharing details of my life, sharing what I'm thinking through, and then inviting them to speak into that and being teachable and showing that not only am I going to listen to your advice and welcome it in my life, but I actually want to apply it. And that'll, as different things come up, that will allow them to continue to pour into you and to continue to help you be seeing things rightly and wisely. And we need that, as women, especially when it comes to men and relationships. And it can be easy for us to miss key things. And so we need people that are understanding the details of situations, understanding who we are, understanding our heart, what we're struggling with, and how all of those things are going to affect the way that we approach different circumstances and help us walk wisely through them.
And asking that person to help you grow in godliness, not just to grow in godliness for the sake of being a better future wife or mother, but for the sake of Christ and for being a better representative of him. I know it's been such a blessing for me to have different women in my life over the years who have pointed me back to Christ in all kinds of situations. And then I do balance that with specific questions. How do I work through this? Or how do I think through that? Or this is, the gist of a conversation that I had. What do you think about my response? Was that a helpful response, or should I have said something different? And being willing to ask those questions, because there are people who are so much wiser. Well, everybody's wiser than I am, I feel like. But there's just so much wisdom to glean from the people who are either further along in the stages of life or just older in general. Even the older single women. I know there's a gal at our church who's much older than I am and still single and is one of the wisest women I know, so it's encouraging to have that.
And even these conversations amongst ourselves, like I'm saying about both Christi and Heather, you guys share what other women and men are, how they're pouring into you and what wisdom they're sharing in these situations. And then as we're talking, we're passing that on to each other and building each other up in that way too. So kind of get to glean from the wisdom that we're each individually learning from other older, more mature women. So that's a blessing too.
And for the ladies listening who are married and maybe wondering, well, do I just never bring up this topic with a single woman, kind of wondering how to approach it. I think maybe just a easy way, if the lady wants to share about that, you can just ask, is there anything I can pray about for you? Sometimes, single women are ready to share. Yeah, pray about this, pray about I'd like to meet a husband, or, they can bring that up as a prayer request, and that'll open the door for a natural discussion. So that's one way to just kind of potentially lead into a discussion on relationships in a way that's not too probing or pointed, I guess.
You could also ask, may I ask you some personal questions? Would you mind if I asked you some personal questions? Because that's kind of like a pre-question, so that if the woman is like, well, actually not right now, if they deflect the question, that's probably a no, and they're trying to be gracious about it. And if it's, yeah, I'd love to learn from you, let's sit down and have coffee, then that's the time when you open up. But you don't just start dumping on someone who, may not be quite ready to hear what you have to say, or who may not be soliciting it from you, even if you think you have something that you need to tell them. Maybe they're going to someone else for counsel.
Yeah, that's really good. Heather, you've got 2 minutes to share any closing thoughts.
So I just jotted down a couple things. One is just be in the Word, because then it's just less time for sin and selfishness. The more that you're in God's Word, the more that you are going to be more ready to see what His plan is for your life. Another thing, and I stole this from someone else, but this gal had said, run your own race. Don't compare, stay in your own lane. You might be on the 1600 meter and they're on the 50-yard dash, but God will give you grace for your race. And so it's so easy when you're single, or when you're married but have no children and everybody else around you is, or when you're, just different situation, when you don't have the perfect job and all your friends do, when you don't get to the college that you want. Any situation, it's easy to compare, and don't do it. It's terrible. Confess when you sin. Like, I think that it's easy to play the pity party when you're single. And a lot of times we just need to say, Lord, I've been selfish this week, or my thoughts have just been so earthly minded. We're all prideful. And if you don't think you're prideful, well, then case in point. And then the last thing I would just say is just, if you have Jesus, then you have everything that you need. So Darren constantly reminds me, everything else is a bonus. We don't deserve anything else. And so we can pray and we can trust the Lord, but ultimately at the end of the day, if we have the Lord, then we are set. And He's given us everything we need for life and godliness. And so I think that's just a beautiful truth to rest in.
So good. Thank you, ladies. I think this is going to be really helpful, and hearing your gracious responses was really helpful for me. And I know it'll be something I carry with me through my single years. So thank you so much for coming on here today.